I'd like to talk about people. Jesus always came for people. He didn't come as a lecturer. He came to meet people's needs. And I want to talk about two people in particular, and one of them is a woman. And I'm going to read from the New King James Version of the Bible, and I'm in Mark's Gospel, and I'm in chapter 7, and I'm in verse 24. So I'll read these verses to you. In verse 24 of Mark's Gospel, chapter 7, from there he, obviously talking about Jesus, from there he arose and went to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And he entered a house and wanted no one to know it, but he could not be hidden. For a woman whose young daughter had an unclean spirit heard about him, and she came and fell at his feet. That's the best place to go, isn't it? Fall at his feet. And the woman was a Greek, a Syro-Phoenician by birth, and she kept asking him to cast the demon out of her daughter. But Jesus said to her, let the children be filled first, for it is not good to take the children's bread and to throw it to the little dogs. And she answered and said to him, yes, Lord, yet even the little dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. Then he said to her, for this saying, go your way, the demon has gone out of your daughter. And when she came to her house, she found the demon gone out and her daughter lying on the bed. There's a woman who believed Jesus, and in another gospel, it said that he wouldn't answer her at all. He refused to answer her. But this woman was in need. And you notice that when Jesus was on earth, he always met people's needs. He always answered their needs. He came to those who needed him. He said in another place, he said, the righteous, the self-righteous people don't respond to him because they think they don't have any needs. And he said, it's those that need a doctor I've come for, those that are ill, those who don't think they're ill have no need of a doctor. And he's using an expression there because he came and he healed the sick, he raised the dead, he delivered people from devils. Those people came to Jesus because they had needs. But if we don't realize that we have needs, we won't come to Jesus, will we? But it's when we need him. And I'm thinking of another lady. She couldn't stop bleeding for many years. Verse 25 of Mark 5, now a certain woman who had a flow of blood for 12 years and had suffered many things from her physicians and had spent all that she had, was no better, but grew worse. And she heard about Jesus. In verse 24, when she heard about Jesus, she came behind in the crowd and touched his garment. For she said, if only I may touch his clothes, I shall be well, or shall be healed. Immediately the fountain of her blood was dried up, and she felt in her body that she had been healed of the affliction. And Jesus immediately knew in himself that power had gone out of him, turned around in the crowd and said, who touched my clothes? But his disciples said to him, you see the multitude all about you, and you say, who touched me? And he looked around to see her who had done the thing. But the woman, fearing and trembling, knowing that it was her who touched him, came and fell down before him and told him the truth. And he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction. These were two women who had needs. And what else did they have? Something that's very, very important. They had faith. They had faith in Jesus. The first lady that we read about, her daughter had a demon, and she was desperate for her daughter to be delivered. And she came to Jesus, and Jesus rejected her. He said, it's not fit to take of the children's food and to give it to the little dogs. I wonder what you would do if you came to Jesus and you asked him about a situation, and Jesus would turn to you and say, no, it's not right. What would you think about that? Would you think he didn't love you? Would you think that he doesn't care about you? I wonder how you would react and how I would react. Would I think, oh, well, that's the end of the matter. I won't bother the master anymore. I won't bother Jesus anymore. I'll just go and I'll live the rest of my life with a daughter that is possessed of a devil. Or would you truly have faith in Jesus and see beyond that which he said to you and realize in your heart that because he's able to deliver your daughter, that you keep, what we say in English, pestering him. We keep asking and keep asking until he realized that you meant it 100%. And then he would turn to you and say, great is your faith. Go. I've answered your situation, whatever it is. I think when people read that and other scriptures concerning Jesus, people might feel, oh, well, this is not for me. And they'll give up and they'll go away. Do you know what the word, I don't know, we have a word in English, it's called desperate. I don't know if that can be translated into Persian. I don't know what it would be, but it means to be, it's the only thing that you're thinking about continually. And it's the uppermost concern in your heart and life. And this woman, who I mentioned, the Greek woman that we read first, she was desperate. And I want to say this, and Jesus really is looking for desperate people. You might think, wow, because we need to reach the heart of Jesus. Otherwise, he won't believe we mean what we say. So think of that woman who had the problem with the bleeding, which we just read. There was something in her heart. She was desperate. She'd spent all her money on doctors who couldn't help her, couldn't heal her. She came to a place of desperation. And it was out of her desperation that she went to Jesus. And she knew if only she could touch his clothes, that she would be healed. She didn't say in herself, I might be healed. It's possible. She knew that she would be healed because she said, if only I could touch his garments. And we read that Jesus said, who touched me? All the people that were following Jesus, all the people that were around Jesus, there was one particular person he knew that had touched him. But there could have been many, many people. If you go to the marketplace and it's busy and there's many people, and you go into the fruit stall and you want to get some fruit, and there's lots of people around you, and they might brush against you, they might touch you. So all these people who were around Jesus probably, definitely would have touched him, brushed against him. But he knew that there was one person out of all the crowd who touched him, because he felt power go out from him. And he turned and he saw the woman and he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you whole. Go in peace and be healed of your affliction. Isn't that amazing? Jesus knows those who are desperate. Jesus knows those who are serious. And there's many people, and I know that when I was in India, there are people there that we refer to as rice Christians. They joined churches only because they knew, being poor, having very little, that if they joined a Christian church, they would be fed, they'd have food. People would look after them and care for them. But their motivation, the reason that they went to the church, was not for Jesus. It was for themselves only. And I believe there's people like that all over the world in churches. But they're not real. So there's two people. I'm going to find another person in the Gospels. If you can just bear with me a minute. You know, when Jesus said to his disciples, they said, Lord, teach us how to pray, how to ask. How do we ask? That's what he said. They said, how do we ask? Because Jesus had been asking his Father. We call it praying. That doesn't mean anything. It's asking. So Jesus was asking his Father. He was often prayed all night long. Sometimes he got up very early in the morning and went to be alone with his Father and was asking him. And his disciples said, well, how do we ask? And he said, well, when you pray, that's the word we have in the Bible, or when you ask, he gave them a whole list of things that they should ask for. And then if you go into Luke's Gospel, and in chapter 11, and in verse 5, after he told them how to pray, how to ask, and he said to them, which of you shall have a friend and shall go unto him at midnight and say unto him, friend, lend me 3 loaves of bread. For a friend of mine in his journey has come to me, and I have nothing to give him to eat. Can you imagine a friend coming to you in his journey and you got no food? And he's been traveling maybe 2 or 3 days in the desert. And you come to you to stay the night and you realize, I've got no food. Of course, this wasn't planned, this journey. He just turned up at his door one night, hungry and thirsty. So the man whose house his friend had arrived at, when he realized he had no food in the house, he went to another friend, and I'm going to read it. A friend of mine in his journey has come to me, and I have nothing to set before him. And he from within shall answer and say, so this is the man now, the house he's gone to, this is another person. And he says to his friend who's asking for bread, don't trouble me now. My door is closed, it's shut. And my children are with me in bed. They're sleeping. I cannot rise now, I cannot get up and give you, because I'm in bed. My day is finished, my children are in bed asleep, and I'm trying to sleep, and you've come now and you've disturbed me, you've woken me up by banging on my door. But, he says, this is what Jesus says, I say unto you, though he will not rise up and give him, because he is his friend, yet because of his situation, because of his desperate situation, he will arise and give him as much as he needs. Do you notice it's not because he was his friend? It was because his friend was desperate. And he says that's our way to ask God. And he goes on to say, and I say unto you, ask, and it shall be given you. You know, he says ask. He didn't say pray. He says ask. Because people can go and pray and say prayers, but God's not interested in people's prayers. He's interested in those who are desperate and get to such a place that they ask God and he hears them, not because you're his friend, but because of your need, because of my need. And we all have needs, but how desperate are we? God doesn't hear prayer. He hears the desperation of a person's heart. And I want to say, God's heart towards mankind was such that his love was extreme. His care for you and for me and all the world was extreme. I don't know if that comes through in those who are not English speakers. It was extreme. God, and so when we read in John's Gospel, God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son. The word there ought to be translated, God's love was extreme. And because his love to us is extreme, he wanted to do something about it. And so he sent his only begotten Son. Out of the extremity of his love for you and for me. God's love is extreme. It's so extreme that his Son went to Calvary, went to the cross and was crucified so that you and I could be saved, could be redeemed. That's God's attitude towards you. And it's never changed. His love is extreme now as it was when his son hung on the cross. His love for you and me is just as extreme now as when Jesus hung there. It's not changed. His concern for us. And the people let's go into John's Gospel, and I'll try and bring this out. So if you go into John's Gospel in chapter 3, I'm going to read from my normal Bible. It talks about Jesus being lifted up. In verse 14 of chapter 3, he's talking about himself, and in verse 13, no one is ascended up to heaven, but he that came down from heaven, the Son of Man, which is in heaven. And then he says in verse 14, as Moses lifted up the snake, the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man be lifted up. He's talking about the crucifixion. He's talking about the cross. He's talking about him being nailed to the cross. Because if you know your Old Testament, he's talking about the time when the people in the wilderness had sinned against God. They'd sinned terribly. And Moses went and asked God, because God had sent these fiery serpents, these snakes, amongst the children of God in the wilderness to punish them. Sin must always be punished because God is holy and righteous. He's not vindictive. Moses represented God. He was God's representative on the earth at that time. He went in God's name. And Moses pleaded with God and asked him and what he should do to stop the snakes killing people. And God said, make a pole and make a serpent, a snake of brass, and put it on the pole. And all those that look upon the pole will be healed if they've been bitten by the snakes. And Jesus said, even as Moses lifted up the snake in the wilderness, so must I himself be lifted up. It's no good looking at. See, these people were desperate. They were desperate. They were going to die. God's, in his wrath, was punishing them, and we'll all be punished for sin. All of us. But Jesus, just as the serpent in the wilderness was lifted up, he was going to be lifted up on a pole, on the cross. And if we look to him in our desperation, these people were desperate. They were dying. And if they looked up and saw the snake, the brass snake, they would be saved. God promised. And that's why Jesus said, even as Moses lifted up the serpent in the wilderness, even so must the Son of Man, speaking of himself, he must be lifted up. And then he goes on to say, so that whosoever believes in him should not perish, because those in the wilderness were perishing. And that's why God said to Moses to make this brass serpent. So what does it mean to believe? Whosoever believes, in verse 15, in him should not perish but have everlasting life. He didn't say those who believe in him will not perish, but should not. Maybe that doesn't come across easily if you don't speak English. It's a possibility. They should not perish if they look upon Jesus crucified, but shall have everlasting life. And then this is what I was saying here in verse 16, for God so loved the world. His love was extreme. It was so extreme that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever they are, believe in him should not perish but have everlasting life. Isn't that amazing? But so what does it mean to believe? It doesn't mean, oh, I'm going to decide that I'm going to believe on Jesus today and go to church next week on a Sunday. It means to be desperate, even as those who were bitten by the serpents were desperate. This is the context of what he's saying. Even as Moses in the wilderness, so must the Son of Man be lifted up. It's this state of desperation. So I just want to say, like that woman who came to Jesus because her daughter had a devil, possessed by a devil, She didn't go away when Jesus said, no, it's not for you. She pursued him. She continued to believe in her heart that he was able to do it. If only she could say something to him to make him change his mind. See, these people in the wilderness were being punished. And Moses went and asked God, and God gave him a remedy, gave him an answer to the problem. And Jesus is the answer to the problem. But it's the answer to those who are desperate, not to those who suddenly decide, like many people in India, I'm going to become a Christian because I'm going to get things that I couldn't afford to have if I don't. But we also read in John that those who don't believe will perish. So to believe is something that is so deep. It's not what we'd say in English, superficial. It's not on the surface. It's right deep in the heart, in the soul of a person, whereby they call out to God, save me. And so that's what the Apostle Paul says in Romans chapter 10. It says, those that call upon the name of the Lord shall be saved. So if I was to call my child to me, I might say, come on, come here. But he might not respond because I'm not calling from a place where I really mean it. I'm hoping he'll come to me. But when he hears from you and me, like that woman called on Jesus, he heard something in her and responded. Something in his heart said yes. And like our child, when we call it, so the child is in danger. He's gone near fire. And you and I are not going to say, come on. Are we? We're going to shout in desperation. Because, and that's what God is looking for from you and me. Do we really want him? Do we really believe him? So when we're asking, from where are we asking? Am I saying to God, I'd like you to do this, if you don't mind? If it's not too much of a bother to you, God will never answer that sort of prayer, because God doesn't know that sort of nature, that sort of talking. Because, as I said, his love is so desperate that you and I should be saved. And it's demonstrated by sending his son. And God is looking for that belief in your heart toward him, that nothing else matters. Nothing else matters in this world but that he should answer your request. So like that man was in bed with his children, fast asleep, when his friend came and knocked on the door, the man's first response was, "Go away." Just like that woman who needed a daughter delivered of a devil, Jesus said to her, "Go away. It's not fit to have the children's food." But because of the person's desperation, because of their need, Jesus answered the lady, met her need. And in the parable about the man who came to his friend's house, he got up and gave him as many loaves of bread as he needed. This is the way that Jesus is saying we are to ask him. That's why he gave that parable. Even though it might appear that God's not answering you, God wants us to get to a place in our hearts where he believes us. And that will take everything you've got. And it's called faith. And God will answer. So, I mean, there's not many of us on this meeting, but I'm looking at you, and I know you've all got needs, family needs, or other needs. And if we will if we can touch God's heart with our own heart, God will always answer. But if we're like that woman who needed her daughter delivered from a devil, and we give up, well, she didn't give up, but if she should have given up and say, okay, it's not for me, and walked away, her need would not have been answered. And if that man who needed the bread in the parable had not continued asking and knocking at the person's door, maybe calling at his window continually, so the man who was in bed with his children probably thought, well, this man is going to keep shouting and knocking at my house all night long. I'm not going to get any rest. And that's exactly what Jesus is saying. That's exactly why Jesus told that parable. God wants you to pester him to answer your need. You might think, wow, who am I? Well, that's what he says. He said, ask. Don't give up. But it's how we ask.